What do you think of when you hear the word opioid? When you think of this word, do you think of a drug, a pill, a person, or do you kind of see like an episode of The Walking Dead when you look outside and you just see a bunch of people that just are walking around looking like they're dead when they're still alive? They just look really torn up. For me, I think of my Uncle Stan. My Uncle Stan struggled with opioid addiction all my life. I remember him being married at one point. He had 3 kids. Everything was going well for him until eventually he got tired of using prescription pills and got into heroin. And at that point, his life started to slowly fall apart. He moved in with my grandma in her 2-bedroom apartment, and I remember playing with him and having a lot of fun until eventually he started to isolate himself in his room more and more. And at that point, my grandma got pretty fed up and kicked him out. And at that point, he decided that his next best living situation would be to live in front of her apartment. So he got this couch and he had these trash bags and he set it up real nice, and that's where he lived for a couple of years. And I remember as a little girl having to step over him while he was passed out with a needle in his arm, and my grandma was right behind me picking up the needles to make sure that nobody would step on it. And eventually my Uncle Stan moved on from that place and he started to bike around town looking where to cop and get his next high so he didn't get sick. And then he moved to Minnesota to get clean. In 2016, I got a call saying that my uncle had relapsed, but this time he relapsed on heroin that was laced with fentanyl, and it killed him. And it devastated my grandma because she had to live with the fact that she outlived her son. And no parent ever wants to experience that. But unfortunately, it's so common today. Our country is going through an opioid crisis. According to Christine Vestal, nearly 200 people a day die from drug overdoses. About half of those are caused by fentanyl. Now, why is this such a problem? Maybe because the fact that this is such a preventable problem. There's so many ways that we can go about to prevent people from dying. According to the Lone Institute, 1.5 million people will die from drug overdose, suicide, or alcohol by 2025. And this does not have to be the case. The thing that's so frustrating with this is that there's actually a lot of solutions to these problems. One of these being that we get doctors to start agreeing to taper off their patients instead of just cutting them off randomly or tapering them without notice. It is so common for people to experience things like accidents or surgeries, and they get prescribed pain medication, and then all of a sudden they get cut off from it, or their insurance won't pay for it anymore, and they're still addicted to it physically, so they need to get it somehow, and they look to the streets to find that. And eventually pills on the street get to be too expensive, so next thing you know, they're looking for heroin or they're looking for cheap pills, and somehow like these could be laced with fentanyl. Another solution we can start looking into is creating more safe sites available for using addicts. There's a lot of controversy behind that because a lot of people think that you're either co-signing them still using, or it's just going to keep making the problem worse. My opinion is that it creates a space for people to use and get clean needles, which is going to prevent diseases from being passed around. It's not going to be as much HIV being spread around through dirty needles. And also, if an overdose occurs, there are nurses on staff to help treat that. So that can potentially help lower the numbers of overdose deaths. Also, some of these sites can also test your drugs to see if it's clean or if it's laced with fentanyl. That would totally help with our problem. According to Time magazine, back in 2001, Portugal was in the grip of an all-time heroin high. What they ended up doing about that is they made a policy to decriminalize the consumption of drugs. So, in this policy, anybody caught with less than a 10-day supply is sent off to a commission. They speak to a doctor, they have a lawyer, and they're offered treatment. There isn't that big of a fine depending on how big the supply is. And what that's done for Portugal is lowered the use of drugs because they stopped making a distinction between soft and hard drugs. And I feel like in America, we have this stigma around harder drugs. Maybe people don't want to associate with others who do harder drugs, or people do harder drugs because they want to be different. But if we were to make no distinction between soft and hard drugs, then that eliminates the stigma between all of it, and it's all equal at that point. With that being said, I hope before I die, I can see these statistics start to lower over the years. I hope everyone has a great day, and I look forward to making another assignment for my communications class.